The moment Delia read that text, lying in a hospital bed with an IV in her arm and a nurse somewhere down the hall humming softly to herself, she made a decision. Not a loud decision. Not the kind that comes with crying or slamming doors. It was quiet, almost peaceful. Like something inside her had been waiting a very long time to finally stop holding its breath. But to understand what that text said, and why it broke something loose in her that had been stuck for 11 years, you have to go back to the beginning. You have to understand who Delia was before she became someone's wife. Delia Mae Hutchins grew up in Decatur, Illinois, the second of 4 children, in a house that always smelled like something on the stove. Her mother, Patricia, was a woman who believed in 2 things above all else: hard work and keeping the peace. Her father, Harold, worked at the grain elevator on the south end of town for 30 years without missing a single day. They weren't wealthy. They weren't demonstrative. But there was a steadiness to that house on Maplewood Drive that Delia carried with her into adulthood like a coat she didn't know she was wearing. She was smart. Not in the way that got celebrated at school, not the kind that won debate trophies or got written up in the local paper. Her intelligence was quieter than that. She noticed things. She remembered things. She could read a room the way some people read a book, picking up on every tiny shift in mood, every half-said thing, every silence that meant more than the words around it. She went to Illinois State on a partial scholarship, studied social work, and spent her junior year volunteering at a family shelter in Bloomington, where she learned that most of the broken things in the world came from the same place. People who stopped seeing each other. That was the year she decided she was going to spend her life making sure people felt seen. She met Brandon Okafor at a house party in Normal, Illinois, the February of her senior year. He was getting his MBA. He was tall, careful with his words, and when he looked at her across the room, he looked at her like she was interesting. Not pretty in the way men usually meant, interesting. Like he actually wanted to know what she thought about things. They dated for 2 years. He proposed on the back porch of her parents' house on a Sunday afternoon in June, and Harold shook his hand and Patricia cried, and Delia stood there holding a ring she hadn't expected and felt the warm certainty of a future that made sense. They were married in September. Delia was 26. She took a position at a nonprofit in Chicago, where they'd settled so Brandon could take a job at a consulting firm in the Loop. The work was hard and underpaid, and she loved it. She helped families navigate housing assistance. She sat in rooms with people who had nowhere to go, and she helped them find somewhere. She came home tired in a way that felt earned. For a while, things were good. They had a 1-bedroom in Wicker Park. They had a routine. They had inside jokes and Sunday mornings and the kind of easy comfort that comes from knowing another person's habits by heart. She can't tell you exactly when things started to change. That's the thing nobody warns you about. It doesn't happen in one moment you can point to. It's 100 small moments, each one so small on its own that you almost convince yourself it means nothing. The first thing she noticed was that Brandon stopped asking about her work. Not overnight, gradually. The questions got shorter, then they stopped. She'd come home with a story about a family she'd helped, something that had moved her, and he'd nod and look back at his phone. She told herself he was tired. She told herself she was being too sensitive. Then came the comments about money. Brandon's career was moving fast. He'd been promoted twice in 3 years. The consulting firm gave him a bonus that was more than Delia made in a year, and somewhere in the shift of their financial reality came a shift in how he talked about her work. "It's not exactly paying the bills," he said once, not cruelly, almost offhandedly, and Delia had laughed it off because she didn't know yet that you should never laugh off the first one. By the time she'd been married 4 years, she could feel herself shrinking. Not dramatically. Not in a way anyone watching from the outside would have noticed, but she felt it. She started presenting her opinions as questions. She started pre-explaining herself. She started being careful in a way she'd never been careful before. When her nonprofit lost its city funding and she was laid off, Brandon suggested she take some time before jumping back in. "You've been running so hard," he said. "Take a breath. We don't need your salary right now." It sounded like generosity. She chose to hear it as generosity. She took the time. She never quite went back. It happened slowly, the way all the big things in her life had happened. Not in a rush, but in a drift. She started handling more at home because she was home more. Then she was handling everything at home. The cooking, the cleaning, the dry cleaning pickup, the grocery runs, the scheduling, the dentist appointments, the birthday gifts for his mother and his sister and his college roommate, who had a baby every 2 years like clockwork. Brandon worked. Delia managed the life around his work. That was how it settled. She told herself she would go back to work once things leveled out. She told herself this for 7 years. What she didn't let herself think about too hard was how Brandon had changed toward her in those years. How the man who had looked at her across a room like she was the most interesting person there had started talking to her, like she was an employee he wasn't quite satisfied with. Not always. Not even most of the time. But enough. He'd criticize the way she loaded the dishwasher. He'd make comments at dinner parties that positioned her smallness as a punchline. Delia doesn't really keep up with current events. She's more of a homebody. And smile when he said it, and she'd smile too, because what else could she do in front of his cousins and their wives? He called it teasing. She called it nothing because she didn't call it anything at all. There were no dramatic incidents, no thrown dishes, no screaming matches. There was just the slow erosion of being with someone who had, over time, stopped respecting you, and knowing that if you tried to explain that to anyone, they would look at you and say, "But he provides for you, doesn't he? He doesn't hit you, does he?" And you would have no answer to those questions that didn't make you sound ungrateful. Their son, Trevor, was 9. Their daughter, Lily, was 6. Delia loved them with the specific intensity of a woman who has quietly poured everything she had into 2 small people. She ferried them to school and soccer and piano lessons and pediatric appointments. She read to them every night. She was present in a way that Brandon, who traveled 4 days out of 7, simply wasn't. When Trevor asked once why Daddy was always working, Delia said, "Because he loves us and he wants to give us good things." She said it automatically. She'd said it so many times it had become reflex. It was a Tuesday in March when she first felt the pain. Sharp, on her right side, bad enough that she had to sit down on the kitchen floor while making lunches. She waited a day, it came back. She waited another day. On the 3rd day, she called her doctor and described it, and her doctor told her to come in that afternoon. She dropped the kids at school, drove herself to Northwestern Medicine, and sat in an exam room in a paper gown while a doctor she'd seen twice before pressed on her abdomen with careful hands and told her they needed to run some tests. She texted Brandon, at the doctor, "Having some tests done, might be a while." He replied 20 minutes later, "Okay, can you pick up my dry cleaning before you get the kids?" She stared at that for a long moment. Then she put her phone face down on the exam table and told herself he hadn't understood the seriousness of it. She hadn't said the word hospital yet. She hadn't said tests. She'd kept it vague because she didn't want to worry him unnecessarily. She kept telling herself things like that. The test came back indicating a possible ovarian cyst, potentially complicated. They wanted her admitted for observation and possibly a procedure. A nurse helped her get settled in a room on the 4th floor, pale blue walls and a window that looked out at the parking garage, and Delia sat in the adjustable bed in a hospital gown and called Brandon. He didn't pick up. She called again 20 minutes later. He picked up on the 3rd ring and she could hear noise in the background, voices, the low murmur of a restaurant. "Hey, I'm in a dinner meeting, can I call you back?" "Brandon," she said, "I'm in the hospital, they admitted me." A pause. "Are you okay?" "They don't know yet, they're watching a cyst. They might need to do a procedure tomorrow." Another pause. "Okay, well, keep me posted." And then, "Hey, did you reach out to your mom about the kids? Because I've got an early call tomorrow and I can't." "I'm in the hospital," she said again. "I know, Dee. I'm saying someone needs to handle the kids." She called her mother. Patricia drove down from Decatur that same night, showed up at Delia's hospital room at 11 p.m. with a tote bag full of things Delia might need. Her own pillow, a good moisturizer, 2 magazines, a bag of the honey-roasted peanuts she knew Delia liked, and sat in the chair beside the bed and held her daughter's hand without saying much, because Patricia had always understood that sometimes holding someone's hand was the whole thing. Brandon did not come that night. He did not come the next morning, either. The procedure went smoothly. The cyst was benign. The doctor was kind and clear, and told her she should rest for a few days. Take it easy. Let someone else handle things at home. Delia nodded along and thought about who that someone would be. She was lying in recovery, a little foggy still from the anesthesia, when her phone buzzed on the table beside her. It was a text from Brandon. "Hey, how did it go? Also, can you call the landscaping company when you get a chance? They were supposed to come Thursday and I didn't see anything on the calendar. And can you check if Trevor has practice Saturday? I told my brother we might drive up to see him, but I need to know the schedule first." She read it twice. Not "Are you okay?" Not "I love you." Not "I'm on my way." Not even "I'm sorry I couldn't be there." Just the landscaping company. Trevor's practice schedule. As though she weren't lying in a recovery room with a catheter still in her arm. As though she had been out running errands and had simply forgotten to update the shared calendar. For a long moment she didn't feel anything. And then quietly, underneath the anesthesia fog and the beeping monitors and the distant sound of a television down the hall, something settled in her chest like sediment finally reaching the bottom of a glass of water that had been shaken for 11 years. She did not text him back. She lay there for a while. The fog lifted slowly. Patricia came back around noon, and Delia ate half a container of Jell-O and watched her mother read a magazine and thought about something she had said to the family she used to work with, back when she still worked. She had sat across from women in situations far worse than hers, and she had said gently, clearly, The moment you stop believing it will get better on its own is not the moment you give up. It's the moment you get honest. She had believed that when she said it to them. She had never applied it to herself. She was discharged the following morning. Patricia drove her home. Brandon was at work. The kids were at school. The house was clean and quiet and enormous, and Delia walked through it slowly, room by room, and looked at the life she had built and understood for the first time that she had been building it for someone who wasn't really living in it with her. He was using it. She had been building it and he had been using it, and those were not the same thing, and she had spent 11 years pretending they were. She made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table, and she started making a list, not a dramatic list, just a practical one. She had done social work for 5 years. She knew how systems worked. She knew how to find resources. She knew that the difference between being stuck and getting out was almost always the same thing: a plan. She called a lawyer that afternoon from her car, parked in the Target parking lot so she wouldn't be overheard. The lawyer, a woman named Keisha who had been recommended by a friend of her sister's, was matter-of-fact and clear and kind in the way that efficient people can be kind. She told Delia what she needed to know. Delia wrote it down. She called her old supervisor at the nonprofit, a woman named Ruth who had kept in touch with occasional emails asking when Delia was coming back. Delia said, "Soon, I think soon," Ruth said. "I have a part-time opening, it would get your foot back in." Delia wrote that down too. She called her mother and told her the truth, not all of it, not in one phone call, but enough. Patricia listened without interrupting, and at the end she said, "You know, whatever you need, we're here." Harold got on the line and said, "Your old room is still your room." And Delia pressed her hand over her mouth in the Target parking lot and cried for about 4 minutes, and then she wiped her eyes and drove home and made dinner like nothing had happened. Brandon came home at 8. He ate the dinner she'd made. He asked if she was feeling better. She said yes. He said good and put his plate in the dishwasher and went to his office to take another call. She watched him go. She did not hate him. That was the thing she couldn't quite explain to people later, when she was able to explain things. She had stopped hating him somewhere along the way, because hating him would have required a level of feeling toward him that she simply didn't have anymore. What she felt was something closer to clarity, like a window that had been fogged for years had finally been wiped clean, and what she saw through it wasn't ugly, it was just real. Over the next 6 weeks, she moved quietly. She took the job with Ruth. She told Brandon she was doing some part-time consulting. He didn't ask follow-up questions. She opened an account at a different bank, at a different branch, and began setting aside what she could from the money she earned. She met with Keisha twice more. She talked to her mother every day. She arranged for Patricia to take the kids for a long weekend in April, telling Brandon they were going to see her parents for Easter, which was true. She said she'd drive up Saturday after helping a neighbor with something. That was not true. That Saturday morning, after Brandon left for his golf game, Delia packed 2 suitcases, children's books and the good scissors and Trevor's inhaler and Lily's stuffed elephant that she would have been inconsolable without. Her own things, the files she needed. She drove to Decatur. She did not leave a note. Brandon called that evening. He called 3 more times. The texts started coming around 9 p.m. First confused, then insistent, then something that rhymed with concern but felt more like inconvenience. "Where are you? This is ridiculous. The house is a mess. Can you at least tell me what's going on?" "The house is a mess." That was what he led with. She texted back once. She said, "The kids are safe. I'll be in touch through my attorney." She sat on the edge of the bed in her childhood room that night. The same room where she had read paperback novels by flashlight as a teenager, and she listened to the quiet. Lily was asleep across the hall in the guest room, holding her elephant. Trevor was on the fold-out couch downstairs, and had already made friends with the neighbor's dog through the fence. Patricia was downstairs, probably still at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, which was where Patricia always was when she was thinking. Delia sat in the quiet and thought about the woman she had been before. The one who had walked into a party at 23, and made a stranger feel interesting just by talking to him. The one who had sat across from broken families and helped them find their way forward. The one who had thought that caring for people was a kind of power, not understanding then that it could also be used against you if you let the wrong person decide what caring was worth. She thought about her children asleep down the hall. She thought about how Trevor had asked her once, after Brandon snapped at her about something during dinner, "Mom, why does Dad talk to you like that?" And she had said, "He's just tired, baby." And Trevor had looked at her with the unsettling clarity of a 9-year-old and said, "He's always tired." She had changed the subject. She had poured more milk. She had not forgotten it for a single day since. She started back at the nonprofit in May, 3 days a week. By June, she'd moved to full-time. Ruth had held the position because Ruth was the kind of person who remembered what good people were worth. She found a 2-bedroom apartment in Evanston. near a school with good ratings and a park Lily could walk to. It was smaller than the house. The kitchen was narrow. There was a radiator that knocked in the winter. She loved it in a way she had not loved anywhere she'd lived in 11 years. The divorce took 8 months. It was not without its painful days. Brandon hired an attorney who was aggressive in the way that people hire aggressive attorneys when they've realized too late that they stood to lose something. There were difficult meetings and difficult phone calls, and a week in August when Delia cried every night after the kids went to sleep and questioned every decision she had made. But she didn't turn back. Keisha was steady and precise. Patricia drove down twice a month and took the kids for weekends so Delia could breathe. Her sister Vani flew in from Atlanta for a week and slept on the couch and made her laugh every night and reminded her, in the specific way that sisters can, of exactly who she was before everything. Trevor adapted faster than she expected. Kids do, Lily took longer. There were tearful bedtimes and difficult questions, and one evening when Lily asked if it was her fault, and Delia held her for a long time and explained, in the way you explain things to a 6-year-old, that some things between grown-ups just stop working, and it has nothing to do with being loved. You are the most loved person in this apartment, Delia told her. You and your brother. That part never changes. Promise, Lily said. Promise, Delia said. And she meant it in a way she hadn't meant many things in a long time. It's been 2 years now. She will tell you that she doesn't miss the house. She doesn't miss the dinner parties. She doesn't miss the careful way she used to measure her sentences before she said them. She misses, sometimes, the idea of what she thought she was building. The particular vision of a life she had held on to long after it stopped corresponding to reality. But she doesn't miss the reality itself. She went back to school part-time last fall, working toward her licensure as a clinical social worker. It means more school, more debt, harder years ahead. Ruth calls her overqualified and says it like a compliment. Trevor started a journal. Nobody knows why, but Delia doesn't ask because she recognizes the impulse. Lily is 7 now and has opinions about everything. Mostly hair and dogs and what kind of sandwich is best, and she expresses these opinions loudly, and Delia finds this, on balance, wonderful. On a Tuesday last spring, Delia was leaving the office. Her desk, her files, the framed photo of the kids on the windowsill, and she passed a new client in the waiting room, a woman about her own age, eyes down, hands folded in her lap in the particular posture of someone who has spent years making herself small in occupied spaces. Delia stopped. Are you doing okay? She asked. The woman looked up. Her eyes were careful, the way eyes get when they've been caught off guard by someone being kind. I don't know yet, the woman said. Delia nodded. That's actually a really good place to start, she said, and she meant that too.